So in this video, we're going to talk about some SAT questions that require you to use your knowledge of solving equations. On here, I have 3 different types of questions that are found on lots of the SATs. And these all are based on this idea of solving equations that you are learning in 9th grade. So the first one says, if 3x minus 24 equals negative 18, then what is the value of x over 4? So looking at this, it seems a little bit complicated. We have 2 different equations, our first one over here and our next one here. We've got lots of steps going on, but really all this has to do is solving the first equation. So if I look at the first equation, I want to find that answer because basically what it's saying is the first thing is true. So 3x minus 24 does equal negative 18. If that's true, then we can use that information to find the second value. So the first one says 3x minus 24 equals negative 18. So if this is true, we can solve this equation. So we want to draw our line down our equal sign. Start the furthest away from x, so that's with our minus 24. Well, what's the inverse of minus 24? So we're going to add 24 to both sides. Those will cancel, and I'm left with 3x equals, be very, very careful with that negative. What do I get when I add negative 18 plus 24? I get 6. Now my next step, what's happening to the variable on the left-hand side? So if we're multiplying by 3, then to undo that, we want to use the inverse, so I want to divide by 3. And so I'm left with x equals 2. So basically what I learned, that if the first equation is true, then x has to equal 2. So if I know that x is 2, then I can use this in my second equation. So if x is 2, then I can plug that into my second equation, where the x goes. So instead of x, I'm going to put a 2. The rest of the equation just says over 4. And 2 over 4 I know is 0.5. So if I look at my answers, that is one of my answers. It's option D. And so this comes up a lot where they say this is true. So there's one equation that's true. And then how can you use that information to plug it into another equation? So we've done a ton of the stuff underlined in purple. A ton of the stuff where we just find what the value of x is. So if we told you to solve that, you would have no problem. The only additional step is now once you know that, how can you use that for the second equation? And that's the end of the first type, and that comes up a lot on the SAT. So now let's look at this second type. So it says if t plus 5 over t minus 5 equals 10, what is the value of t? So if we had something like this, if we had t plus 5 over 3 equals 10, well then you would know that to get rid of the divide by 3, we would multiply both sides by 3. So we've talked about that quite a bit. So now let's look at our actual problem. So we have t plus 5 over t minus 5 equals 10. So using what I just mentioned, I want you to try the first step. And then once you've done so, click play again, and we'll walk through it. Okay, so if this was a 3 on the bottom, we would just multiply by 3 on both sides. So using that logic, I would want to multiply by t minus 5 on both sides. And then to do this, I just need to be very, very careful because there's two things going on. So when there's multiple things going on, you want to group them together. What do? We'll use parentheses. So for this side over here, these will just cancel. That's kind of the whole point. And I'm left with t plus 5 equals. And then on this side, if I have something, this 10, being multiplied by parentheses, I want to distribute that 10. So I want to take the 10 and distribute in here to get 10t. And then take the 10 and distribute here. 10 times negative 5 will give me negative 50. And now this is something like that we've seen before a ton, where we just have variables on both sides and we can solve. So you can start this lots of different ways. I am going to start by adding 50 to both sides because I see that there's a minus sign here and I just want to get rid of it. So I'm going to add 50 to both sides. And so I get t plus 55 equals 10t. Now I know that I want to get this t over on the other side. Since it is positive, I'm going to subtract t on both sides. And I end up getting 55 equals 9t. And then my very last step is to divide by 9 on both sides. So when I do that, 55 divided by 9 ends up giving me a decimal. So I'm running out of room at the bottom, I'm just going to write it up here. So t equals 6.1 repeating when I do 55 divided by 9. But if I look at my answers, that's not one of the answers because all of theirs are in fraction form. So you can either go backwards and figure out what 55 divided by 9 as a fraction would be. And if you look, that's an option, 55 divided by 9. And so that is actually our answer. The other way that you can do it is you can go through each of the options and see what they equal as decimals. So the very first one, 45 divided by 11, would give me 4.09. Well, that's not what we want. 5, we don't have to convert. 11 over 2 gives me 5.5. That's not what we want either. And so lastly, our 55 over 9 gives us the 6.1 repeating. So you can either just go backwards, figure out what the fraction would be. In our case, it was just what we were dividing by, 55 divided by 9. The other option is once you have the decimal, you can compare all the other decimals and see if any of them match. All right, and our last type of problem gives us an equation, 10 equals 2x plus 4, and asks how many solutions exist to the equation shown above. So if we're being asked this, the easiest thing we can do is solve this on our own and then figure out how many solutions exist once we have our answer. So if we take our equation and we write out, so we have 10 equals 2x plus 4. We want to draw our line down our equal sign. Since 2x, that's the only thing that has an x with it, I would get rid of the plus 4 by subtracting 4 on both sides to get 6 equals 2x. and then divide by 2 on both sides to get 3 equals x. So once I have my answer, then it's pretty easy to see how many solutions I have. So x is 3, and it can only be 3. So how many solutions is that? Well, we would just have 1, so that's answer B. So I want you to think about if I was solving, so let's say I'm solving my problem over here, what would indicate to me that I have no solution? So what would it look like to get no solution? To get no solution, we would have to have something that's not true. So let's say I'm solving and I end up with something like 4 equals negative 1. Well, that's not true, so that would indicate to me that I have no solution. Let's say the same thing, I'm solving. What would indicate that I have infinitely many solutions? Well, if I have infinitely many, then I would find something that's true. So instead of 4 equals negative 1, I would have something like 4 equals 4. Well, that is true, so that means no matter what gets plugged in, it will always work, so I have infinitely many solutions. So we have to know what those two things look like, as well as our normal answers are ones that just have one solution. So these 3 types are super attainable for you guys, and these are like big questions on the SAT. These are questions that juniors are getting wrong. And you are going to get them right because you know how to solve these equations and how to use them to your advantage on the SAT.